Welcome to Life Stories, where we dive into powerful and transformative journeys that inspire change and self-discovery. Today, we share the story of Emma, a woman who spent years putting everyone else's needs before her own, only to realize that true happiness comes from setting boundaries and living for herself. Her journey is a testament to the strength it takes to stand up for your own worth, even when it means walking away from the expectations of those closest to you. Subscribe to our channel to start today's story and many more inspiring tales. Emma had spent nearly 2 years planning the perfect vacation for her family. It wasn't just a trip, it was a culmination of her hard work. Long hours at the office, and every penny saved. Flights were booked, luxury hotels secured, tours arranged, and even dinner reservations at renowned restaurants were carefully chosen. She had dreamed of this for so long, imagining the joy on her parents' faces when they experienced the world she had so meticulously crafted for them. This was her chance to give them something special, something unforgettable. But when the day finally arrived, the moment she had been waiting for, it didn't go according to plan. Emma was running a few minutes late. Just a couple of minutes. Nothing major. But when she pulled up to her parents' house, she could already see her mother standing on the porch with a suitcase in hand. The sharp, familiar pang of guilt twisted inside her, though she knew it wasn't deserved. After all, she had worked tirelessly to make sure everything was ready, and 2 minutes late didn't seem like a grave offense. "You're late," her mother said, her voice unusually light, almost casual. As she turned to head back inside, Emma glanced at the clock on the dashboard of her car. It read 6:02 a.m. 2 minutes late, hardly anything to cause concern. Yet she felt a knot form in her stomach. It wasn't the time, it was the weight of what was about to unfold. She stepped out of the car to help with the luggage. But something caught her eye, a familiar face that shouldn't have been there. Her sister, Sarah, was emerging from the house. Suitcase in hand, Emma froze, the smile on her face faltering. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. But the crack in it betrayed her confusion. Her mother turned to face her, a bright, far too cheerful expression plastered on her face. "Oh, Emma, we decided Sarah should come instead of you," she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "She's been so stressed lately, and she really needs this trip." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Emma's chest tightened, and she felt the air leave her lungs. Instead of me? She had spent months, no, years, dreaming of this moment. She had planned everything down to the smallest detail, pouring herself into this gift for her family. And now, her mother was brushing it all aside, like it was a mere trinket. "But Mom," Emma forced herself to speak, her voice shaking slightly, "I've been planning this for years. I paid for everything." Her mother waved her hand dismissively, as if the effort Emma had put into this trip was trivial. "We're grateful, sweetheart, but you're always working so hard. You can take another trip later. Sarah needs this right now." Emma looked at her sister. Sarah wasn't even pretending to be embarrassed by the situation. In fact, she was smiling, no, smirking, at Emma, shifting her weight onto one hip with that familiar, entitled look. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she said, her voice dripping with fake gratitude. Emma felt the ground beneath her shift. It wasn't just the trip that was being taken away from her, it was the realization that, in her parents' eyes, she would always come second. Sarah needed everything, while Emma was expected to quietly accept the scraps. The sting of rejection burned deep. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. There was nothing she could say that would change the situation. Instead, she bit her lip, fighting back the wave of anger and hurt rising inside her. She turned towards the car, trying to compose herself, forcing a tight smile as she opened the trunk to unload the luggage. "Let's get going then," she said flatly, not caring whether they noticed the hurt in her voice. If they wanted Sarah to come instead of her, then fine, she wouldn't fight it, but she wasn't about to let them enjoy it. The drive to the airport was suffocatingly quiet. Sarah chattered nonstop about her plans in Paris, her excitement oozing from every word, while Emma gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, her hands tight with frustration. "Oh my gosh, Mom, did you see that TikTok about Paris? I can't wait to go shopping there. Do you think we'll have time for that? Or will the tours take up the whole day? Sarah's voice was high-pitched. Oblivious to Emma's silence, her mother chuckled softly from the front seat. Of course we'll have time. We'll figure it out when we get there. Emma's jaw clenched, but she didn't say a word. When they arrived at the airport, her mother gave her a quick, almost insincere hug, thanking her for being understanding. This means a lot to us. And to Sarah, she added, as if that somehow made everything okay. Sarah beamed at Emma as she wheeled her suitcase toward the terminal. Thanks, Violet. You're the best. Emma stood frozen, watching them disappear into the terminal, her chest tight with anger and confusion. She had been a doormat for too long, always trying to please everyone else, always being the responsible one. And this was the breaking point. It wasn't just about the trip, it was about everything. All the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and expected to sacrifice for Sarah. She had given everything, and in return, all she had received was a sense that she didn't matter. The tears that threatened to fall remained unshed. Instead, Emma turned and walked back to the car, the weight of her heart sinking deeper with each step. If they wanted to prioritize Sarah over her, then they could, but Emma was done trying to make them happy. The ride home was a blur. The road stretched out ahead of Emma, but she hardly saw it. Her mind replayed the events over and over, each word of her mother's like a sharp knife twisting deeper. You can take another trip later. Sarah needs this right now. Those words echoed in her mind, louder than the hum of the engine. A reminder that no matter how much effort she put in, it would never be enough. Her chest tightened as she gripped the steering wheel. She had worked so hard to plan everything, the flights, the tours, the special dinners, the luxury accommodations. She had imagined the joy on her parents' faces when they arrived in Paris, the unforgettable experiences they would share. But now, all of that had been taken away from her. And her parents didn't even seem to care. Her mother's words, her sister's smugness, all of it felt like a punch in the stomach. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just being pushed aside for Sarah, she was being erased. When she got home, the house felt strangely quiet. The emptiness of the space matched the hollowness she felt inside. She stared at the front door for a moment, before walking inside, heading straight for her laptop. The decision was made. If they wanted to take Sarah instead of her, then fine. They wouldn't enjoy the trip on her dime. The cool blue light of her laptop screen felt oddly comforting as Emma opened the travel accounts she had spent so many hours perfecting. One by one, she canceled the hotel reservations, the tour bookings, the airline upgrades. She watched as the confirmations piled up in her inbox, each one a small act of defiance. She had given them everything, but they had chosen to leave her behind. For a moment, there was a strange sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, or making them suffer, it was about taking control. She had been their fixer for so long, the one who made everything right when things went wrong. And now she was done. If they wanted to go on a trip without her, they could figure out how to get by on their own. As Emma clicked the final, cancel, button, a sense of relief washed over her. She didn't have to be the one who always made things right anymore. She wasn't their doormat. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Then again, and again, messages piled up, followed by an onslaught of missed calls. They had arrived in Paris, and things weren't going as planned. The hotel couldn't find their reservation. The tours weren't booked. The reality of Emma's decision was beginning to sink in for her family. And they were furious. The calls continued, relentless and insistent, as though they expected Emma to fix everything. She stared at the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. But she didn't answer. Not yet. For the first time in years, she wasn't going to be their solution. As the hours passed, Emma allowed herself to feel the anger, the hurt, and the frustration. She wasn't going to let them guilt-trip her into undoing what she had done. She had done enough for them. It was their turn to handle their own mess. Finally, after a long and exhausting day of silence, Emma picked up her phone. Her mom's name flashed on the screen, followed by a barrage of texts. What's going on? Why did you cancel everything? Fix this now. The messages were full of urgency, but Emma just let them sit there. She didn't feel the need to answer immediately. It wasn't until she finally picked up the phone that her mother's anger hit her like a tidal wave. "Violet, what did you do?" her mother hissed. Emma didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. Instead, she calmly replied, "I cancelled everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before her mother finally spoke again. Voice dripping with disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "Maybe because you decided to take Sarah instead of me," Emma said, her voice steady but cutting. "You replaced me. You didn't even ask if I was okay with it. I'm done being the one who sacrifices." Her mother's voice rose in outrage. But Emma cut her off. "You thought I'd just swoop in and save the day like I always do? Not anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't a silence of peace, but a silence of realization. Emma wasn't the same person anymore. She wasn't going to be pushed around. Her mom's voice broke the silence again. But Emma was no longer listening for any apology. She wasn't interested in hearing how they would fix things. She didn't care. And when her mom asked if she understood the gravity of what she had done, Emma just shrugged it off. She didn't need to justify herself anymore. Not to them. Not to anyone. The phone call ended with a finality that surprised Emma. She turned the phone off, placed it on the couch, and felt something new settle in her chest, a deep sense of peace. The next few days passed in a strange quiet. A peace Emma had never known. The phone calls continued, of course. But she didn't pick up. The messages piled up with increasing frustration, each one more urgent than the last. Her mother's tone was laced with guilt, while Sarah's messages dripped with entitlement, demanding that Emma fix what she had broken. But Emma refused to cave. For once in her life, she allowed herself the space to breathe. She spent her days in quiet solitude, catching up on work, enjoying the small freedoms that had always seemed out of reach. Without the constant pressure of her family's demands, Emma felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It was like she could finally see clearly, without the distortion of guilt, of always trying to please everyone else. Still, the silence was oppressive. It wasn't just the lack of phone calls or messages, it was the space between them. Emma realized that this wasn't just about a trip. This was about everything that had been simmering under the surface for years. The way she had always been the one to pick up the slack. The one to smooth over their mistakes. The way Sarah had always been the golden child, receiving all the attention, all the care. Emma had learned to swallow her hurt, to suppress her needs for the sake of keeping the peace. But now, she wasn't going to do it anymore. Her thoughts wandered back to the days she had spent planning the trip. She had imagined every detail, meticulously arranging the flights and hotel stays, picturing the joy on her parents' faces as they experienced the luxury she had provided for them. And now, it was all gone, taken from her without so much as a word of thanks. The more Emma reflected on it, the more she realized how much she had been taken for granted. The years of sacrifice, of putting everyone else first, had left her feeling invisible. She had been the one to shoulder their burdens, to make sure everything was in order, while Sarah had floated along, carefree and coddled. Emma wasn't just angry about the trip. She was angry about the years of being overlooked, of never being enough. The relief she had felt at first was now tinged with something else, regret. Maybe she had cancelled everything. She had thrown away the trip she had worked so hard for. But it was the only way to make a statement, to show her family that she wasn't going to be their fixer anymore. She couldn't help but wonder if they'd ever understand, if they'd ever realize how much she had sacrificed for them. Would they ever stop to think about the years of hard work she had poured into their lives? Or would they continue to take her for granted, expecting her to keep cleaning up after them? As the days went by, Emma's thoughts became more complicated. The initial anger had begun to fade, replaced by a gnawing feeling of uncertainty. She wasn't sure if she had done the right thing. Maybe she had been too harsh. Maybe she should have just swallowed her pride, let them go on the trip, and moved on. But she knew deep down that would have meant more of the same, more of her being pushed aside, more of her putting everyone else's needs above her own. By the time the weekend arrived, Emma had come to a decision. She wasn't going to let guilt rule her anymore. She wasn't going to let her family manipulate her into being the doormat again. If they wanted to make things right, they would have to do it themselves. The phone buzzed again, this time from her mother. Emma hesitated before answering. Violet, her mother began, her voice a mixture of anger and hurt. You've gone too far. Your sister is in tears. Your father is furious. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked. The reservations are gone. Do you have any idea what you've done? Emma's heart tightened as her mother's words washed over her. She knew the situation was dire for them. But she also knew that she wasn't the one who had caused it. I didn't do anything, Emma replied, her voice steady. You made a choice. You chose Sarah over me. Now you get to deal with the consequences. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before her mother spoke again. You're punishing us all for one decision. Is that really fair, Emma? Fair? Emma scoffed. Was it fair when you replaced me on a trip I planned? Was it fair when I worked for years to make this special for us? Only to be told it didn't matter? Her mother's voice softened. We didn't realize how much it would hurt you. Emma, we thought you would understand. I don't understand, Emma said, her voice calm but firm. I understand that I've been putting everyone else first for years. And it's never been enough. I'm done being the afterthought. I come first now. Her mother didn't respond. There was nothing else to say. Emma didn't wait for an apology. She didn't need one. For the first time, she had stood up for herself. And that was enough. After hanging up, Emma sat down on the couch. The phone still in her hand. The silence in the house was almost comforting. She was alone, but she was finally free. The weight of her family's expectations no longer pressed down on her. For the first time in years, she could breathe. As the weeks went by, Emma found herself standing at a crossroads. The phone calls from her parents became less frequent. But their messages continued, each one carrying a different tone, some apologetic, others defensive. She had learned that it wasn't about them coming to terms with what happened, but about her finally coming to terms with herself. She wasn't the fixer anymore. And that was something she had to accept. Even if it meant walking away from the family dynamic she had known for so long. Her journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't without doubt. But Emma had found the strength to set boundaries, to demand the respect she deserved. For the first time, she was living life on her own terms. The burden of trying to please everyone else was no longer her responsibility. It was after booking her solo trip to Italy that Emma realized just how far she had come. In Rome, as she wandered the cobbled streets and indulged in the simple pleasures of life, she finally understood the lesson she had been avoiding for so long. Her happiness was her own. She didn't need to sacrifice herself to make others happy. She could stand on her own 2 feet, build her own dreams, and live a life that was authentically hers. The road to independence wasn't easy. But as Emma stood in the quiet of her newfound freedom, she knew one thing for sure: she was enough. She had always been enough. If you enjoyed Emma's journey of self-discovery, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more life stories that inspire and transform.